Sur puede ser una teoría, puede ser una práctica o puede ser una serie de conclusiones prácticas y conceptualizadas a partir de la teoría y de la realidad. ¿Cómo ve India a América Latina? ¿O cómo ve una experta india a América Latina? Thank you. Which is Latin American experience for you? Is it useful? Is far away and long ago, or especially far away?
No, it's very useful for us. And in fact, although it's far away geographically, it is very close to us in terms of what is happening in our countries. Because I think what happened in Latin America, the whole neoliberal experiment, is a huge source of information for us in terms of what can actually happen to the society. And it's very important for us now because so many of your countries, you are trying to undo the damage that occurred over the period of neoliberalism. And you are doing many things here in Chile with pensions, you're planning to do something with higher education, you're planning to reform many of the changes and privatizations that you brought about. In India, we are doing the opposite. We are, in fact, embarking on the same strategy that you all did in the 1980s.
That means you are doing, not you, but Indian government are doing damages.
Exactly.
And why?
Well, because there is the usual belief that this is what matters, that growth has to be delivered by the corporate sector, that the state has to reduce its role, that you cannot afford to provide the basic goods and services to the people, and that effective demand should not come from wage incomes. Now, all of these beliefs have been, in fact, internalized by the government and the policymakers in India. So even though we have the experience of Latin America, and even though we can now see in front of us that there are countries that are, in fact, doing everything they can to go back and to change away from that
and that's
whole...
very hard and difficult.
Exactly.
And take a long time.
And destroys a generation.
Exactly.
So despite that, we are not seeing this. So for us, it's very important to come here and take these lessons and tell the people of India that this is what happens.
Which are the consequences of the damage, the concrete consequences of the damage in India now?
Well, increased inequality, it's very evident. Much greater fragility in terms of the lives of the people. But, because in India we began also as a more poor economy, it's coming out in so many ways like hunger. We have now the largest number of hungry people in the world. And we have more
Sorry, how many people?
The current estimate, if you go by the standard international calorie definition, would be about 500 million people. So hungry in terms of, severely hungry, about 250 million people. Moderately hungry, moderately malnourished, more like 600 million.
We are not speaking about extreme poverty, but hungry people. Hunger.
Defined in terms of how many calories you consume. And if you just take moderately hungry, it is 600 million. Extreme hunger, what the FAO describes as severe malnutrition, is 250 million. Now, that is obscene for a country like India, which says it's growing so fast, which is going to be a major emerging nation. It is obscene. But it is something that we have delivered because we destroyed our agriculture. We reduced the protection we gave to farmers. We deprived our people of basic food security. So that is one of the big things that we have to undo already.
And which would be the way to undo that, for example?
Well, there is now a food security bill that has been passed by Parliament, which is going to provide relatively subsidized food to about 70% of the population through a public distribution system. That is going to procure from farmers, and that will make farmers also more viable because you will give them a minimum price for the food grain that they produce. So that's one of the things. This is already existing, but the new law is going to make it a little bit more extensive. We must do something about employment because part of the reason people are hungry is because they cannot earn enough to actually buy food. So now 95% of the Indian population is not working in formal employment of the workforce. 95% of the workforce. We have to provide more employment. We have to make small enterprises viable.
And the open unemployment, which is the rate there?
Open unemployment is not so high because we have no protection. So there's no way you can't be openly unemployed. There is zero, no unemployment allowance, no way that they will survive. So we still have low rates, but even those are coming up, especially among the youth. Among the youth, it's more than 10%. And among certain categories of urban youth, it is 15 to 20%. But mostly, people cannot afford to be unemployed because we have absolutely no protection.
And in economic, not in ethic terms, in economic terms, isn't there part of the elite that may think that to get people inside the market, inside consumption, inside the society, will be worth for them, not for the people, for them in terms of earnings?
Yes, absolutely. The trouble is that, the pattern globally has been that you don't give workers their wages, you give them debt. And this is a similar pattern that happened in India. The growth process we had, those very high rates of growth, 8 to 10%, a lot of it is debt-based. A lot of it is because retail credit has gone up massively for housing, for cars, for consumer finance. And then the companies have borrowed to invest more to meet that kind of demand. So in a sense, the corporate sector stopped bothering about the bottom 50% because they were not seen as a potential market and they were relying on this debt. We know that that kind of debt-driven bubble cannot last. And we know that it's coming to an end. Already the Indian growth story has subsided and it's no longer achieving what it was supposed to do. This is the perfect moment for a rethinking. But we need a politics that will force the leaders to actually change their economic direction. And unfortunately, that politics is not yet emerging.
And when you spoke about Latin American way of undoing damage, which is the main thing that got your curiosity?
Well, there are many different forms of recovery in Latin America, but what I find very inspiring is how even very, very small countries that were completely under the thumb of American, US neoliberalism, like Ecuador, a dollarized economy, completely a banana republic,
they
really.
They are still dollarized because it's very hard to give up it.
But despite that, they have made so many changes. Even while remaining dollarized, remaining globally integrated, they have made so many changes and they're trying to change more and more. And I find similar things happening. I think Argentina is a very interesting example. I think many of the measures in Brazil, expanding public education and health, not so much Bolsa Familia, which is, I think, completely overrated. But a lot of the other expenditure that they have made in social areas are very important. Similarly, I think something in Chile, we are trying to privatize pensions. And you showed us how terrible that is. And you have actually been trying to renationalize the pensions, and you've done.
In Argentina, we did it.
In Argentina, you did it already, and in Chile,
had to do it.
Exactly. And in Chile, the process is on. So I think raising the minimum wages, enforcing the minimum wages, ensuring basic minimum child support, things like that. These are very important things that we can learn from.
You investigate about feminism.
Yes.
Okay, what has it to do with these conditions of extreme poverty, of hungry people, which is the link between the two issues?
Yeah. Well, I believe you cannot think of any progressive solutions, socialist, leftist, whatever you want to call it, without also incorporating a feminist perspective. What has happened in India is that the pattern of growth has not just been unequal across classes, but very, very unequal across men and women. And so you've got women who have been massively relied on for underpaid work and unpaid work. So the system of accumulation has really grown based on this unrecognized labor of women through domestic labor and the care economy, and through very, very underpaid women who are working even in the public sector. When we hire nurses and teachers and doctors, we don't call these women proper employees. we give them a tiny thing which is lower than the minimum wage. And we want to run a health system based on local women who are underpaid, or an education system based on local school teachers.
You said education, and we have there students that...
Yes. You know, the student movement in Chile is another source of inspiration, I think. I'm very delighted to see how the Chilean student movement recently has been in the forefront of progressive causes and has pushed even the political process.
It's not the same in India.
In India, it is much more divided. We had a good student movement. There are still very good elements. But right now, politics in India is very confused.
But here in Chile, you have that kind of student movement, and it's very huge and strong, because the dictatorship and democracy had not corrected, privatized all in education.
Yes, that's right.
That's the damage here.
Well, you know, even in India, we managed to privatize a lot simply because we didn't let the public sector grow. And so all kinds of private institutions came up. So today, 2/3 of enrollment in tertiary education and higher education is private. So already we have done so much damage. And now many of the public institutions, some of the best institutions, are being undermined through all kinds of crazy policies, like the University of Delhi. And as a result, students are so busy just coping with these changes, and also, you know, many different political threads, so that they are not combining to become a major progressive force in the same way as Chile.
From where come the students, or the students at the university at least?
Well, you know, it is...
Sorry, in social terms.
In social terms, it's very mixed. We have a system of affirmative action. So in the public universities, you will get a lot of elite, but you will also get people from different backgrounds. In the private universities, there are many categories. So the very expensive ones, obviously, the poor cannot afford, and the deprived sections, socially deprived sections, cannot afford.
And there's not affirmative action for the poorest people, for the university? No.
Only by social category, by caste. Because caste is still a very important thing in India. In fact, we have a very complicated hierarchical system, which is very resistant to change. Despite all the growth and the modernization, it persists. So we need to have this affirmative action for caste, but we should also have affirmative action for poor people.
You don't have it?
Not really, no. We have a system of scholarships, but it's very little. It's not enough to allow people to... So you have now many people selling their land, going into debt to put their children through higher education, and then they don't get jobs. So it's terrifying what is happening.
Which kind of importance has the BRICS for India?
I think the BRICS is very important because it gives India a bigger place on the world stage than it would get on its own. Of course, the presence of China, but you know, Russia also is a very big player. And the fact that Brazil and South Africa are also now very heavyweight in their own regions. As a result, India gets listened to globally in a way that it would not necessarily on its own, especially now that everyone has recognized that the Indian growth story is not such a great thing after all.
And what about your experience here in Santiago de Chile, in the South School? Was useful for the other people, for the students?
Yes, I enjoyed it greatly. It was very interesting. It's very exciting to see people from so many different regions come together and then find they have a lot in common, figure out the differences. And you know, you can see now there is so much discussion amongst themselves that in heated debates about issues which carry on over lunch and dinner. It's a lovely feeling to know that there is that kind of exchange and that we have so much to share with each other in terms of knowledge, experience, insights. So I've enjoyed it a lot.
You work in a university called Jawaharlal Nehru in Espanol. What would you say? In which way may you define Nehru?
You know, he was a visionary, and I think his vision of India is something that we will still appreciate because it was a secular, democratic, equitable country that he wanted and he had the vision for. It didn't turn out that way, and many of his policies were, in fact, not always in that same direction. But nonetheless, I think his vision is deeply valuable, even today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. South, South, Sur, Sur, con conclusiones prácticas.